It's been 4 years now since I first played Ori and the Blind Forest, and hell, that game was a revelation. I've heard from many sides back then that the game was supposed to be awesome, but I could never really believe it. Until I started it for the first time. From the beginning to the end, the game captivated me. And apparently I am not alone in this. In fact, no matter what scene you take, no matter in which moment you take a screenshot, Ori and the Blind Forest looks fantastic and just beautiful. That's the feeling the game starts with. The first minutes when the beginnings of the story are told are marked by a constant smile. That's changed relatively fast, but nevertheless the game loses nothing of its beauty. Also not about its many levels, because the game has much to offer. It's actually, at least visually, obvious. The design of the game world, the graphics, the colors, even the opponents. All this together results in the beautiful picture which Ori and the Blind Forest depicts. And in a video or test article, the real strength are lost due to limitations of a medium. What I'm trying to get across through the background music and occasional cuts is the incredibly good soundtrack. I love it when the soundtrack is emphasized in games, but in this case it seems to have been the main point. It's not for nothing that I still like to listen to the soundtracks, and if you enter Ori and the Blind Forest and the YouTube search, the first suggestion is soundtrack. The music in combination with the graphics then gives an overall result in which you can get lost. In the game itself, the music is always appropriate to every situation, in every section of the game, and has its climaxes in the occasional cutscenes. And on top of that, the game has a really great, hearty and yet tragic story to offer. There's one point I have completely left aside so far, and also this one you can only understand if you have tried the game yourself. It's the gameplay. This is another point where I get into raptures. It's so much fun jumping around the world with Ori, fighting and dodging enemies. If you play it on hard, it can be a challenge in places, although I don't know how the game plays on the lower difficulty levels. So besides this beautiful game world, a fantastic soundtrack and a great story, the gameplay is just fantastic. So as far as I can judge, because I don't really know this genre. So the game is going towards perfect, and so I can summarize that for me. In the occasion of the release of Ori and the Will of the Wisps, I played this game again. Actually, I've been waiting for it for all these years so I could play Ori and the Blind Forest again. In the beginning I was worried that I would have too good a memory of the game and therefore expect more than the game actually is. You may know this. And 4 years isn't necessarily a short time, so who knows what you can rhyme so what when it comes to memories of a great game. But I was not disappointed at any point, and so now I have the direct comparison between Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a logical continuation and extension of Ori and the Blind Forest, as this game is, I wish for every sequel to a successful game. Optically at first sight like the prequel, only much more detailed and simply more beautiful. Very often I paused only briefly and admired the visual beauty of this game. There are many places which inspired to it. Especially in the beginning I asked myself again and again how good a game can look at all. There's a lot to see, there are many different places, be it just in the forest, in the dark cave, in winter, in the desert or in the water. Go out on a limb and commit oneself. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is one of the most beautiful games of all time. But not only visually. The music is also a logical continuation. In my opinion, you could swap the soundtracks from both parts and it would fit. Some of the soundtracks from the sequel are even very much oriented on its prequel, so the melody is the same, just interpreted and played differently, if you can say so. If you played Ori and the Blind Forest and loved it, you will immediately feel comfortable in the sequel. Although of course it's not one-to-one the same game, just with nicer graphics and a different soundtrack. In the gameplay some things were changed or rather added. About the first part I only said that the gameplay is fantastic and just fun, but I didn't go into detail. I don't want to do that at this point, but that much is said. You get a lot more abilities, can use them well, but you have to commit to a few, but there's still a lot of room to try out. There's just one point where the gameplay is not quite major, which is one of my two criticisms. Getting stuck on the ceiling sometimes leads to the minor problems in the controls that Ori doesn't do what I want, but that's crumbling on a damn high level. A lot has happened in the skill tree as well. In the prequel you just collected XP bit by bit and invested it accordingly in the skill tree. In the sequel there is no skill tree anymore. You can either buy the improvements with XP or find them. Whereby this is not overlapping, so not that I know of. Then there are combat shrines. These are smaller challenges in which you have to defeat waves of enemies, where enemy wave is the wrong expression, but if you have done that, then you can use more enhancements. With this system you get quite strong relatively fast, but I don't think every improvement is necessarily useful. To the difficulty I would like to lose also a word. I played it on hard. In 99% of the time it was perfect for me. But in 2 or 3 boss fights you don't really do yourself a favor. Especially because if you just had to run away from one, the gameplay was more of a hindrance. Which might bother some people, but not me at all in this case. There's a lot of backtracking. You could fight against the always spawning enemies, or you don't care and use them for locomotion. In addition, you can also simply travel fast at any point of the game if you have already found the corresponding points. Therefore this didn't bother me at all. The backtracking is mainly caused by the fact that there are side quests. The world is filled with much more friendly-minded lives. The Moki are little sweet creatures who are just there to look sweet and warm our hearts. And that works too, at least for me. Really, I love these creatures. Among other things for them, you can do smaller tasks. Then you can extend the home base, help other creatures, collect stuff you need for that. You realize there's much more to do in the game. In the beginning it might be a bit overwhelming, but that will pass very quickly. Accordingly, you need about twice as long for the game as for the prequel. And the story? It's the same as in the prequel. It's beautiful, tragic, heartwarming, and you learn a lot about Ori himself. Although there was one small detail in the unremarkable story of Amoki and Silent Woods. When I noticed this, my mood changed abruptly, but that's just a side note in case you noticed. So what can I tell you about the sequel? Exactly what I said in the beginning. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is the logical continuation and extension of Ori and the Blind Forest, and with that this franchise becomes one of my favorite games of all time.